Beneath candle-lit arches and chanting walls lay a world of endless toil, cold stone, and whispered terrors. Imagine vows that bound flesh to discipline, days measured by bells, and nights haunted by visions. In the breath of every monk hung the weight of silence, penance, and expectation. Here, warmth was rare, comfort rarer. A cowl slips through fog-laced cloisters at dawn-breath, misting, sandals whispering against stone. A gloved hand pauses, tracing frost-glazed glass, as a bell tolls faintly in the distance. Inside, the scriptorium waits in stillness, shelves groaning with ink-blotted parchments. The air is thick with the scent of damp limestone and rancid tallow. A lone monk dips quill to ink. The rasp of vellum fills the hush, each breath, each blink, constrained by an ancient rhythm, older than memory. Tonight, we peel back the veil on a life of prayer and a misery few dared to escape. Before the first bell rang, every monk was already obeying. The rule of Saint Benedict didn't just shape their schedule, it ruled their breath, posture, appetite, even their dreams. A monk bows low before a gilded manuscript, whispering words only God is meant to hear. Ora et labora prae, and work bleeds crimson and gold across the page. The pen's scratch is constant, the turning of parchment deliberate. Knees groan with the strain of yet another genuflection. Long before the sun graces the chapel, food was punishment. Silence was law, and the flesh, something to be conquered, not comforted. Wooden bowls of bean porridge are passed down the table, never a glance exchanged. No speech, only the soft scrape of spoons against clay. A cracked cup steams in the cold. One monk coughs a sharp, wet rasp and freezes as his sound echoes louder than the candles flickering beside him. Nothing is said. Nothing ever is. Long nights invited darker visitors. Sleep-starved and racked by fasting, some monks described battles with demons, temptations in the dark, or visions they dared not name. In the shadows of a narrow cell, a candle guttered weakly. A monk twisted in sweat-soaked sheets, eyes darting beneath closed lids. Then, silence breaks, he jolts upright, breathing ragged, crossing himself again and again. Rats skitter behind cold stone. A chant, distant and hollow, floats up from the depths. And something else breath, but not his own. Time was not their own. 7 times a day and, once more, in the pitch of night the bell tolled, a sound that shattered dreams and stitched the day together like threads through wool. A bell tower looms in the mist. Inside, robed figures shuffle forward, their path lit only by swaying candlelight. The iron bell rings out, harsh and absolute. Half asleep, feet slide into sandals. Then, the chant begins low, rhythmic, impossibly ancient, as their voices rise in unison, their world one of discipline, silence, and shadows continues its ceaseless march toward salvation or surrender. Pre-dawn hush lingers in the infirmary. The air is heavy stale. Rosemary mingles with the stench of rot. Flickering rushlights throw warped shadows across stone walls and fevered flesh. Brother Alred, face pale and drawn, rises from his straw pallet without a word. His fingers tremble as he dips cloth into steaming herbs, the scent acrid and sharp. A rasping breath behind him draws his attention. A patient convulses. He catches the body just in time, absorbing the sudden release with a practiced grimace. No disgust, only weariness. Down a narrow corridor, Friar Oswin limps alone, the rhythm of his chant barely more than breath. His shoulder is tightly wrapped in linen, soaked dark in spots. He winces as he lifts a clay pot, steps barefoot over cold stone, and descends a narrow shaft carved into the boughs of the abbey. At the base, filth clings to every surface. A drop of urine splashes beside his foot. He doesn't flinch, only lifts the lamp, looks upward, and whispers, "Another day of penance." Above, Alred presses a mustard poultice to a groaning man's chest. The hiss of steam rises as it touches raw skin. A wet cough erupts from the far corner. A novice retches. No one turns. Duty is deaf to revulsion. Oswin murmurs the last verse of his penitential psalm, the words dissolving into the mildew-soaked air. He casts lime powder into the pit and lifts the chamber pot, spine protesting with each movement. The matins bell tolls dull, ancient, and inescapable. Alred straightens, wipes his hands on his robe. Oswin emerges from the dark shaft, oil lamp fluttering in his grip. Their eyes meet in the corridor, the flickering light catching hollow cheeks and cracked lips. Nothing is said. Nothing needs to be. The bell continues to toll. They pass each other to shadows in the gloom. One limps toward prayer, toward the chanting choir. The other returns to the dead and dying. Behind them, the echo of ragged breath fades into frost and stone. ChatGPT said, "Today's monks rise in warmth, not cold. Their sandals land on heated tiles, not frozen stone. They study in sunlit libraries, sip espresso in quiet courtyards, and sleep on foam cushions in private cells. The rule still echoes, but its teeth have dulled. What was once life's iron scaffolding now appears to us as ritualized austerity, even choice. At a modern monastery, the morning begins with a hissing jets from a cappuccino machine, its chrome gleaming under LED lights. A monk stirs warm milk into his cup, smiling faintly as sun spills through double-glazed windows. A fridge hums nearby, stocked with yogurt, fruit, and protein bars. Cut 12 centuries back, a friar breathes steam from a bowl of charred porridge, crouched in a stone hall, the only heat his breath. His spoon clinking against a cracked bowl. Scripture, too, has evolved. A novice scrolls through the Gospel of John on a MacBook, fingers light on the trackpad. Pages no longer crinkle, ink no longer stains. Contrast, a medieval youth grinding red ochre on a slate, eyes strained under wavering candlelight. He inks an illuminated P, tongue between teeth, every stroke a prayer. The quill scratches, the beeswax sputters. In the cloister, cold once dwelled in the very walls. A modern monk adjusts his fleece robe beside a discreet wall heater. Thermostat clicks, comfortable silence. Now cut to the past. A friar rubs frost-stung fingers above a brazier, the only fire for 20 souls. His breath clouds the air as he mouths psalms through chattering teeth. The fire crackles. Outside, wind wails like something lost. We call our retreats intense, a weekend without phones, maybe one silent dinner. We journal in the stillness, light incense, stretch beside yoga mats under stained glass. Intensity is curated. For them, intensity was every breath. Hunger gnawed the belly, lice crawled the robes, and prayer was a shield against despair. One monk scrapes his sleeve, dusting away vermin before kneeling again. The stone bites into his knees. His lips move, tireless, even as sleep hovers at the edge. Our silence is optional. Theirs was absolute. Our stillness is sought, theirs Swafford. And yet, to both, the silence still speaks. ChatGPT said, "To walk the path of a medieval monk was to enter a crucible where spiritual longing was tempered by relentless hardship. Every moment was shaped by denial, of rest, of pleasure, of self. Prayer and penance were not practiced, they were endured. This was not retreat, it was surrender. Here, monastic life fused devotion with bodily erosion. The rule of Saint Benedict reigned absolute. It did not suggest, it commanded. Monks rose in darkness to chant 12-hour offices. They fasted through hunger, bowed until their knees cracked, and obeyed in silence, even when doubt scraped the soul raw. A bell tolls in ink-black morning, feet shuffle over cold stone. One monk falters, another's whisper stings like a slap. A manuscript glows in candlelight, taciturnitas, obodientia, ora, et laborich word, a link in the chain of self-erasure, and when prayer did not cleanse, they turned to blood. To purge sin, monks offered flesh. Bloodletting was penance. Pain, purification. The barber surgeon draws his blade when breathes deeply as the lancet bites. Elsewhere, a sweat lodge steams, packed with chanting monks, their robes soaked through. A novice leans over a patient, applying a poultice of vinegar and mummified corpse. The body became an altar torn, drained, burned for the soul's salvation. The slap of skin, the sick-sweet stench of boiled herbs. Suffering sanctified, even the stones conspired to humble, cloisters twisted just slightly off-center to remind the walker they were flawed. Dormitories echoed every shift in sleep, erasing privacy. Cells offered no views, just walls, just silence. In one corner, a forgotten cell bears claw marks on the stone. Discipline hung in the air. A lash dangles above the refectory, bench not used, but seen. Bread, grey with mould, is broken and eaten in ritual silence. The prior watches, unmoving. Monks lived under constant surveillance, an expert voice murmurs. Not just from abbots, but from each other. Their obedience was mutual, enforced communally, endured collectively. This was no personal path to peace. It was a shared burden, a chosen captivity, a life offered not for comfort, but for closeness to God through fire. Prepared to enter the monk's dark cloister where every vow was a cross, and every cross a burden. 12 times a day the bell rang. Each toll carved time into obedience matins, at 2 a.m., Lords at dawn, none at midday, Compline at dusk. The rule of Saint Benedict wasn't a suggestion. It was a total recalibration of life. Monks stirred in their cells before the sun had risen, blinking in darkness, cloaks clutched tight against the cold. As the bell echoed through the cloister, a line of hooded figures moved silently beneath crumbling arches. One stopped weeding a frost-bitten garden only when the bell summoned him to chant. In the scriptorium, parchment cracked as it was opened to a new page, wax seals stiff and curled at the edges. Psalms spilled into stone corridors, chanted in rhythmic monotony. A painted manuscript glowed in candlelight. The canonical hours mapped in a perfect wheel, each segment packed with ritual, rule, and obligation. To pray was to work, and to work endlessly. Hands reddened with wool and cold as monks spun yarn until their fingers split. Hides were scraped into parchment. In garden beds and at candlelit desks, bodies bent and folded without pause. A novice leaned into a loom, his sweat soaking into coarse thread. Another stirred ink thick with crushed gallnuts and iron, watching it stain the pot like blood. In one chamber, a scribe collapsed, mid-verse, his hand still curled around the quill, lips frozen on the first word of a new line. Pain and production were inseparable. Monastic labor wasn't simply toilet, was ritualized suffering. Devotion rendered through fatigue, and pages offered up as penance. On most days, cold gruel, on fast days, even less. Salt and oil were rare indulgences, meat nearly unknown. Hunger was not punishment, it was purification. In the refectory, monks sat shoulder to shoulder, no voice raised, no spoon misplaced. Chipped bowls released faint tendrils of steam, as pea pottage cooled in the morning air. Barley bread, tough and flecked with mould, crumbled between calloused fingers. During Lent, days passed with no dairy, no eggs, no warmth, only a dull ache in the gut and the slow rhythm of chewing. They believed hunger brought holiness. An empty stomach, properly suffered, was a step closer to God. Monastic healing was closer to sorcery than science. Leeches fed on open skin, drawing out black bile in slow drops. To treat plague sores, monks crushed burnt dung into powder and stirred it into honey. Mummified remains from Egypt were ground and mixed into vinegar as panacea. In the infirmary, a friar pricked his brother's finger, blood trickling into a brass basin while Latin prayers were whispered beneath breath. Herbal steam rose thick and acrid from a cauldron, swallowing the air with rot. A novice, face pale, stirred a foul-smelling poultice, his hands trembling. Their cures weren't meant to heal. They were meant to purge, to scour the soul through the agony of the body. Pain wasn't endured, it was applied. Sleep came in slices. It was tolerated, never trusted. Dormitories stretched without doors, only stone and shadow and the slow rhythm of breath. Thin light slipped through narrow slits, casting pale beams on stroffled pallets. A bell rang again, Lord's End. A monk jolted upright, eyes puffy and raw. The cold gripped his spine as he rose and knelt, lips already forming psalm verses before his thoughts returned. The buildings were designed to deny comfort. There were no cushions, no fire, no softness. Rest was theft unless it sharpened the soul. Even dreams were interrupted, sliced apart by bells and frost. For the disobedient, punishment didn't come with lashes, it came with silence and stone. The punishment cells were coffin-shaped pits, windowless and damp. No warmth, no time, just darkness. A torch flickered at the top of a stairwell, barely illuminating the black void below. Scratched prayers covered the rock walls, saged by fingernail or shard. Fragments of scripture clawed into existence. Some were only lines. Others were whole verses, repeated over and over again. These cells weren't built to reform. They were built to break, to reduce pride to silence, to trade will for obedience. The community policed itself. No monk suffered in isolation because every monk watched. Every monk was watched. Meals were tests, not moments of peace. A novice accepted a slab of mold-dark bread without a twitch of the eye. Behind him, the prior stood silent, lash in hand, not raised, just present. One monk coughed during grace. He was removed, sent to fast alone, without question, without complaint. The silence between spoonfuls was thicker than incense, pressing like a second skin. Brotherhood, in theory, surveillance, in practice. To break the rule was to risk not just God's wrath, but your brother's. None of this was accidental. The cold, the hunger, the silence, the imbalance of walls and paths and sound, they were blueprints. A monk's bench shows cold patches under thermal scan, mapped precisely to areas where the drafts are worst. The architecture bent around virtue. Corridors curved and tilted, not by accident, but by intention, to unmake pride, to disorient the eye, to humble the heart. Warmth, symmetry, softness, these were gateways to sign. Discipline was built into every beam. To live like this wasn't madness, it was meaning. A life where suffering was structure, where pain was praise, where the body was shaped into a vessel emptied, hollowed, chaldoned, at last, offered up. The final bell tolls at dusk. Wind hums through stone cracks. A candle flickers beside an open rule, its pages warped by centuries of breath and sweat. Misery was not the price. It was the path. The first sound is not birdsong, but the bell tolling across cloisters shrouded in fog. It's 2 a.m. the hour of vigils. Cold breath hovers in the air as Brother Alred pulls himself from his straw pallet. Shoulders knotted from another night beside the dying. Sandals slap softly on frost-slick stone. Monks kneel in cadence, their voices rising into the vaults in solemn psalmodic rhythm. Groans of fatigue are lost beneath the echo of ghost song. Sleep flickers like the last wick on an altar, already gone before the second verse is sung. By 4 a.m., prayer gives way to labor. Brother Oswin, his back bearing the scars of yesterday's penance, hoists turf sod over one shoulder. Brother Cadfael chips ice from the herb beds with numb fingers. The well is nearly frozen, but water must be drawn. No one speaks, blisters split silently. A shovel clangs against stubborn rock. The light is dim and grey. The rule is clear. Labor without complaint is a form of praise. At 7 a.m. it is time to eat, though the word barely applies. Crusts of dry bread are soaked in cold water. Prior Benedict drips vinegar over a novice's bowl to smother any pretense of pleasure. There is no talking, only chewing, coughing, swallowing. A single gag from a younger brother earns him silent dismissal and an additional fast. The air tastes of sour oats and silence heavier than smoke. A single bean, pressed between molars, becomes a test of endurance. By 9 a.m., the scriptorium becomes a battlefield. Hours of silence, broken only by the scratch of quill on vellum. Cadfael grinds pigment until his knuckles throb. Alred's quill splits midver. The ink is frozen in its pot. The benches are colder than the floor. The Psalter does not forgive mistakes. One scribe coughs, and 10 eyes turn in silent rebuke. Precision is penance. Ink spreads like blood across lambskin. Another mistake to be scraped, another hour to be earned back. At noon, the second and final meal, bitter broth steeped in wormwood and onion skins. While they eat, a monk reads aloud a treatise on hellfire. The words fill the air between spoonfuls. Chewing halts at the mention of damnation, then resumes. Oswin eats to the last drop. Alred stares into his bowl, lost in the memory of a dying novice. The prior's eyes find him across the table. That moment of distraction is noted, not forgiven. By 2 p.m., discipline must be enforced. A novice is marched to the cellarum, barefoot and tearless. His sin, whispering a psalm to himself instead of holding silence. The punishment cell is a stone box, barely large enough to lie down in. Damp seeps from every edge. The boy enters alone. The door shuts behind him, and with it, the sound of the world. Outside, prayer continues. Inside, only his own breath and a rat's distant scurry mark the hours. By 2 p.m., discipline must be enforced. A novice is marched to the cellarum, barefoot and tearless. His sin, whispering a psalm to himself instead of holding silence. The punishment cell is a stone box, barely large enough to lie down in. Damp seeps from every edge. The boy enters alone. The door shuts behind him, and with it, the sound of the world. Outside, prayer continues. Inside, only his own breath and a rat's distant scurry mark the hours. At 4 p.m., Alred begins his infirmary rounds. A monk burns with fever. Another is curled in sweat-stained sheets. His boils lanced earlier with sharpened bone. Leeches feed beneath a cloth, dark with blood. Alred murmurs psalms, barely audible. His hands tremble, but he never stops. The air is thick with incense, and the underlying scent of rot. Blood beads on the rush matting. A groan rises, then vanishes into the stillness. Nothing heals, Hirenly slows. By 6 p.m., Compline begins. The monks return to the chapel. Shadows stretch up the stone walls like spectres. The incense hangs heavy, nearly choking. Prior Benedict leads the chant. His eyes remain open, fixed. Oswin kneels behind him, wincing as torn flesh presses against stone. Knees creak in rhythm. The chant builds, not in joy, but in dread. It ascends like fog, weighty and unresolved, returning again to silence. At 8 p.m. they rest. In theory, the straw tick is thin. The air inside colder than the air without. Cadfael curls into his habit. Alred shivers in silence. No blankets, no comfort, just breath misting into the darkness. Around them, others shift quietly, trying not to cry. The floor pulls warmth from their limbs. Stone does not care. Midnight brings no peace. Cadfael stirs from shallow sleep to tend the brazier, coaxing coals with a piece of reed. Oswin sits cross-legged near the wall, scribbling with shaking hand into the margin of a psalter's strange glyphs, half-remembered from dreams, half-feared. The abbey breathes around them. The dark listens. Somewhere, someone whispers a psalm meant only for angels. Before dawn, Cadfael is already in the herb garden. The frost crunches underfoot, his breath clouds in the cold. He plucks leaves of monk's hood, henbane, and nightshade. He knows what each can heal, he knows what each can end. These plants do not lie, they only work. He folds them into cloth, ties it, and returns to the shadows, just as the sun's first edge reaches the far cloister wall. Prior Benedict walks the dormitory. His eyes linger on Oswin's flayed shoulders, on the soaked bandage around Alred's arm. He says nothing. He nods once. It is enough. They will endure another day. Alred kneels in the chapel alone. He traces the grain of the wooden bench beneath his fingers. The candle beside him gutters low. Outside, the bell begins again. Vigils the first bell, or the last. He whispers a prayer not for strength, but for silence, for release, for stillness beyond this rule. His eyes close. Dawn is still hours away. A fresco fades under soot Christ's passion, faces twisted in agony, halos dimmed, chipped by centuries of cold. Beneath that suffering image, monks moved silently, shaping their own flesh into echoes of divine pain. Each lash, each deprivation, was a thread woven into salvation. They didn't run from pain, they wielded it. To suffer was to draw near to God. Oswin kneels before the altar, bare-backed, blood running down through the wax drippings. His hand does not tremble as he lifts the scourge again. The whip cracks across skin, and the air thickens with incense and the faint smell of iron. His lips never cease moving, Latin murmured between gasps. There is no grimace, only a faint smile as agony crests, like prayer carried on a breaking wave. To speak was to assert the self. So the monks vowed silence not just as discipline but as erasure. Words shape identity. Without them, the self withers. Alred watches a fellow monk stumble on the cloister path. He does nothing, he cannot ask, cannot console. The rule forbids it. Their eyes meet briefly, then pass. Silence hollows the world. Coughs are swallowed, greetings reduced to glances. Sandals scrape stone with no sound to accompany their passing. Speech would fracture the uniformity. In this place, there is no room for an eye, and the habit itself, armor, one robe, one cut, one crown of shorn hair. No names stitched inside, no colored thread, no hidden symbol, nothing to mark a man as different from his brother. When Cadfael dons his habit, he disappears. The mirror was banned long ago not for vanity, but because reflection breeds selfhood, and selfhood is a threat to salvation. A prayer rises not one voice, but 50, identical, synchronized. No one leads, no one follows. They dissolve into the chant. Locked alone in the cellar-room, without food, warmth, or light, the mind turns inward. In that silence, darkness starts to whisper. One punished novice claws at the stone, weeping through the night. By dawn, he claims an angel visited him. The prior nods solemnly, gives him extra vigil. No one questions the vision. Whether angel or hallucination, the message is accepted. Truth here is shaped by suffering. Scratching sounds echo through the stone. A flicker moves across the cell wall, but there is no fire. A name is whispered where no mouth speaks. Sometimes there is light. Not comfort, not relief, something stranger, a rapture. A single moment during vigil when the veil thins. Oswin gasps. Mid-psalm, his hands tremble. His eyes gleam with tears. For that moment, the pain slips away. He looks not upward, but inward, and what he sees he cannot name. Then it's gone, and the chant continues. These flashes of ecstasy did not break the system, they reinforced it. The brief joy confirmed the torment was working. Pain opened the door. Rapture was the glimpse. Then the door slammed shut again. Misery, here, was capital. The monk who collapsed from fasting was revered. The one who smiled through fever became a model. In the scriptorium, Alred slumps forward, unconscious. No one moves, not out of cruelty, but reverence. Intervention might interrupt a holy unraveling. Sweat pools beneath him. The sound of quills resumes, uninterrupted. His fall becomes liturgy. Benedict listens to a confession with blank eyes. The brother before him speaks in circles, loops, penitent spirals. Benedict nods, slowly, but he's elsewhere. The system has turned inward. Suffering confirms belief. Belief affirms suffering. There is no escape from the spiral. A censer clinks against the stone. A prayer repeats again, and again, and again. Their world was one of reinforcement. Pain begets faith. Faith confirms pain. The cycle swallows the mind. Some dissolve in it completely. They are not gone, just absorbed. And what of heaven? Not reward, but distant promise. Not the light at the end of a tunnel, but the end of a tunnel that must be dug in blood, day by day. Some found peace. Others only found endurance. In the chapel, Alred kneels again. A single candle flickers before the crucifix. His hands shake, but he doesn't stop praying. Behind him, the bell tolls. Another hour begins. Their sanctity was not pure. It was blistered, broken, raw. But they believed every lash, every silence, every wound carved a path, however narrow, toward the divine. Whether they ever reached it, that was never the point. The suffering was. The cross was not just carried. It was embraced. A flame stutters beside an unfinished prayer. Somewhere behind the stone, silence collapses into itself. And still, they kneel. Every monk was a mouth and an ear. The rule didn't just demand obedience, it demanded attention. The sacristan took note when someone coughed during prayer. The cellarer noticed when a novice's eyes wandered during a homily. Even the infirmary aide, quiet and pious, remembered every breach in silence. In his corner, Alred sat hunched over a hidden ledger. The candle sputtered beside him as he wrote down a name. The quills scratched as he recorded a stuttered verse during lauds. The sound, almost too faint to hear but not too faint to judge. Footsteps paused at the end of the corridor. A moment's breath, then continued. The ledger closed. The name stayed. Trust dissolved beneath layers of whispered vigilance. To be seen was to risk accusation. And no one saw without recording. No one was innocent. Only unnoticed. The cellarum sat beneath the chapel door, half-rotted, bolted tight. They called them tapenade punishment cells. Coffins carved into stone, cold, unlit, damp, no scripture, no candle, no voice. Oswin escorted the novice down the steps. No words were exchanged. The boy's feet dragged slightly, too loud in the silence. At the base of the stair, the door creaked open, and he stepped inside. The thud of closing iron echoed back with finality. There was no key. Or perhaps there was, but no one admitted to having it. Inside, time was measured by drips of water falling from the ceiling, by the ache in joints pressed to mouldy straw. The cold came not just from air, but from the stone itself, seeping into lungs, into memory. Nothing moved, not even thought. There was no punishment spoken aloud. The darkness was the sentence. A mistake didn't need words, only ash. In the refectory, a monk sat with eyes low. On his tunic, a black cross smudged across the chest. Someone had drawn it during the night, maybe while he slept. No one said why. No one had to. It could have been anything. A moment's hesitation during psalm. A failure to bow quickly enough. A distracted glance. Alred saw the mark in the reflection of a wash-basin. His face remained still, but his fingers twitched. He did not speak. He did not eat. The cross wasn't a punishment. It was a label. It meant no one should sit beside you. It meant silence would be stricter. It meant you had been seen. During meals, a bowl remained untouched beside the mark. During prayers, no one made eye contact. There was no absolution, only invisibility, and the slow hope that tomorrow someone else would be marked instead. Twice daily, the monks gathered to confess not just sins of the body, but trespasses of thought. A twitch of envy, a wandering mind, a doubt barely formed. They spoke, in turn, facing the prior. But the entire brotherhood listened. Cadfael stepped forward. His voice was low. I envied another's stillness. He stepped back. Oswin wrote it down. No judgment, only record. Breaths were held as names were spoken. Each confession became a mirror. Each admission a ripple through the cloister's fabric. The room smelled of ink and old wool. The inkpots snapped open one by one. Parchments were ready. Pens waited to absorb failure. No punishment was given. But the knowledge of being known, that was enough. The worst sin wasn't action. It was the thought you didn't confess. And so the monks confessed, and repented, and repeated, again, until even dreams became regulated. The abbey's stones were laid with intention. Corridors twisted not for space, but for memory. A monk walking one way could never see who followed. Small halls branched at strange angles, turning inward without symmetry. Windows were few and narrow. Light moved unpredictably. Shadows clung. Grates cut into walls allowed one side to see, but not be seen. You might feel alone in the dormitory, but breathe wrong, and the prior knew doors locked from only one side. Stairways ended where logic failed. Every step, every pause, was measured. The very act of walking became discipline. You never knew when you were watched, so you acted as if you always were. The walls themselves remembered your posture. The floor corrected your gait. The rule wasn't just read it, was built into the stone. The abbey wasn't a place for men. It was a system for obedience, brick by brick. Penance was not random. It followed rhythm. There was a right way to kneel, a right path to walk, a phrase to say, at the same time, every day. Oswin's knees cracked audibly as he genuflected, then again and again. The sound disappeared into chant. Chalk lines were redrawn every week along the cloister floor paths. Monks followed like cattle. The chant repeated. Not because they forgot, but because remembering was irrelevant. Meaning didn't matter. Obedience did. The rituals circled back into themselves. Processions that ended where they began. Psalms recited so often they blurred into syllables without structure. A monk who broke rhythm wasn't punished with lashes. He was asked to begin again and again, until the body surrendered and the mind followed. Cadfael walked the garden path alone. Always alone. The rule encouraged solitude, but only in the body. The mind was never private. A shadow moved behind the cloister lattice. He didn't look. He didn't need to. Solitude was mandatory. Privacy impossible. The very ground was shaped to channel sound. Gravel crunched under his feet loud enough to be heard. Wind stirred his robe. Nothing escaped the cloister's breath. He was not being followed. He was being remembered by others, by God, by the rule. In the dormitory, no monk turned away while undressing. In the lavatorium, eyes remained forward. In the refectory, silence was not peaceful, it was tense, charged, like thunder before it broke. Every movement mattered. Every thought left a trace. To be alone in this place was a form of exposure. Alred closed the ledger. The ink was still wet. Another name recorded. Another misstep memorialized. Elsewhere, Oswin passed a tunic to a novice black cross already marked. The boy held it like a verdict. Cadfael prepared the punishment cell. Straw swept, water ladled, door tested. It creaked with its usual groan. The bells chimed for confession. The monks lined up, voicing envy, fear, lust, sloth. Intentions became infractions. Memory became evidence. In the refectory, bowls were passed. One sat untouched. In the chapel, a monk knelt alone, eyes on the floor, while chants rose around him as if he no longer existed. Above it all, hidden corridors looped the abbey-like veins, peepholes cut into old stone. Light filtering one way, footsteps masked. The rule was more than ritual. It was a system closed, circular, self-reinforcing. Every habit of thought was reshaped. Every deviation erased. A monastery was not a place to grow. It was a place to vanish. The stone remembered everything. And someone, somewhere, always watched. Even when the bells stopped. Even when you slept. The body shakes. Inhale, exhale, ice presses into the spine. Somewhere, a coach tells you it's temporary, that you're becoming stronger. The camera clicks. Later, this moment will be posted with a hashtag, resilience. But centuries ago, no one clapped, no one coached. Oswin crouched over a stone basin in the pre-dawn dark, jaw clenched as frigid water traced scars down his ribs. No pine-scented sauna waited nearby. Just silence, stone, and duty. Today, people shiver by choice, then warm themselves with tea and affirmations. Back then, the cold didn't end. It simply paused before beginning again. Pain now has context, duration, options. Suffering becomes a story of transformation. But once, it was simply endured. And in that difference lies everything. A woman rolls up her mat, bows to her teacher, and leaves the room barefoot, smiling. She's completed a weekend retreat. She answers a feedback form, sleep in her own bed, reflect. Oswin has no mat. He kneels on unyielding stone, his breath curling into the chill. His vow has no endpoint. His posture is not temporary. His devotion is not optional. The retreat offers release. The monastery never did. One was built around consent, the other around constraint. The difference isn't in the fasting or silence, it's in the right to say enough. Choice is more than a modern convenience. It's the scaffolding that separates healing from harm. Today, we leave the retreat and return to our lives. Back then, they left their lives forever. Dawn edges across the chapel spire, gilding the stone in soft gold. The cloister below lies empty, its cells still, their silence holding centuries of breath. No chant rises now, only wind tracing worn thresholds. Inside, Brother Alred, now stooped and pale, runs one trembling finger through frost. He draws a cross on the door of his cells, reverently. This, perhaps, is his last vigil. No one watches. No one needs to. He has been watched enough. Elsewhere, in a bright, sterile chamber, a retreat participant opens the door to an ice bath. She exhales sharply as cold air rushes out, then steps inside with intention. She has chosen this moment, not from fear, not from doctrine, but from a desire to learn what discomfort can teach without letting it consume. The monks gave everything. Their bodies, their sleep, their voices, their warmth, all traded for a salvation they could not see. Their misery built temples of faith, but it also left scars few would call holy. Today, we inherit their echoes, but we walk a different path. Transformation still demands effort, sacrifice, stillness, but only when paired with care. With consent, with grace, can it lift us instead of crush. Choose your trials wisely. Let hardship shape you but never bind you. A candle flickers in the refectory. For a moment its glow reaches the far wall. Then a breath of wind extinguishes it. Smoke rises, soft and slow, toward the morning light. One vigil ends. Another begins.